guys, welcome to Fruits of the Womb, your authentic source of maternal and child health information. My name is Dr. Vera Bayu. When my son was 2 years old, that's a couple of years ago, he could only say, Mama, Dada, eat, and Tata. And as a mother, I was as worried as hell because I wondered whether my son's delayed speech was a problem. Today on Fruits of the Womb, we discuss speech delay in children. When should you be worried? When should you seek care? I have lovely guests in studio today. You don't want to go anywhere. When we come back from a quick break, I'll introduce them and we go right into our topic. Let's go for a break. We'll be right back.
Your presence has changed my life. Your tenderness makes me want to take care of you forever. And I promise that I will give you nothing but the best always. Cousins Baby with natural ingredients also gives the best care for baby's soft skin and hair. Cousins Baby, growing together naturally. From your first shopping list to the very first sound you made, to your first bath, your first date, you've brought me so much joy, and I promise to always protect you. Camel Baby Antiseptic with a mild formula protects your baby's delicate skin from germs and bacteria.
Welcome back. This is Fruits of the Womb, brought to you by kind courtesy of Cousins Baby and Camel Baby Antiseptic. Let's stay interactive. Join us on our Facebook page. Go to Facebook and type Fruits of the Womb, and then you can post your questions, comments, or contributions, and we will do well to attend to them. Today on Fruits of the Womb, we are discussing speech delay in children. And here with me in studio are the lovely Dr. Mrs. A.C. Gazy Tete on my extreme right. She is an author. She authored the book Heart-Wrenching Marriages from Surviving to Thriving. And this book is available on Amazon and also at all Challenge bookshops. She's also a child development specialist. You're welcome, Dr. Gazy Tete.
Thank you.
And next to her is Dr. Mrs. Nanaya Echa Bonnie. She is also a senior medical officer and a resident pediatrician at the Kolebu Teaching Hospital. You're welcome, ladies.
Thank you. Thank you once again.
Dr. Gazy, when do you say a child's speech is delayed?
Yeah, thank you very much for having us here. Before I actually talk about when a child's speech is delayed, I think it's good for us to set the precedent by defining a few words which people usually get confused. You know, we don't know when we are saying communication, when we're talking about language, when we're talking about speech. So I'll start just by saying that communication is the meaningful exchange of information between parties. And language is actually a set of words and symbols that are guided by rules used in communication. So speech is actually a form of communication, which is evident by the making of actual sounds. Okay, so let's get that straight. Now, when you talk about speech, speech is one of the specific abilities that we expect a child to start making at an appropriate age. And so we say that speech is delayed at the time that the child is unable to meet the age-appropriate speech that we expect, or then the child hasn't reached the achievement within the normal range. For instance, we expect that by 6 months, okay, babies start babbling, they make that ba-ba-ba sound, you know, and endlessly. And by 9 months, we're expecting them to say their first words, Mama and Dada. Now, by 1.5, they have a vocabulary of about 25 words. That's not so rich. But within 6 months, from 1.5 to 2 years, they have what we call a language explosion, where their vocabulary increases to about 200 words. They can say a lot of words, and they actually make 2-word sentences. So if your child reaches these ages and is not able to achieve these milestones, as we call them, then there's a cause to be anxious. But then it becomes a problem at 1 year, when the child didn't babble at 6 months, the child was not able to say the first words at 9 months, and even at 1 year, is not able to point, because at 1 year, most children are able to point and communicate by gesturing. So when all these things are clearly absent, we have a cause to be worried.
So Dr. Bonnie, you're saying that at 1.5 years, there should be about 25 words, and by 200 words. Some children obviously don't meet these milestones. What are some of the causes?
So speech delay occurs if you have any disruption in the structures or the organs that are responsible for production of speech. So we have the lungs, we have the vocal cords, we have the mouth, we have the tongue, we have the teeth. So if you have any disorder that affects these structures, then you know that your child may be having speech delay. So it could end up with, you could have things like the cleft lip and palate, where you have a malformation in the lip and then the palate, and then the child will have a problem with the speech. And then you also have conditions like autistic spectrum disorder. Then if your child is born preterm or premature, the child is also at risk of developing speech delay. And then we also have things like cerebral palsy, which children have problems with communication. So they can also have speech delay. Then another one is the auditory disorder, where they have a disorder in their hearing pathway. So they are not able to perceive sound, and as such, they cannot come out to express themselves.
Because you need to hear before, and then you can learn.
Yes.
But let's talk about, there are some children, for instance, I gave a practical example of myself. 2 years, doesn't have any of these conditions, but for some unknown reason, just says a few words. And a lot of parents have this complaint. They have children, toddlers, who are otherwise normal, but are just not speaking as fluently as they would expect. What are some of the risk factors for such delayed speech, or what are some of the causes? But I know you are eager to answer that question, but before you answer that question, we also decided to ask some people on the streets of Accra what they thought caused speech delay. Let's take a look, viewers.
Doctor bi ho hu a obo otimi hwe no aka kire no mo atwa ba obo ho a wo mo nhwe enti anu sare makora ni nyi a wontimi nkasa
mate sa yi bi wo motakrama ase se doctor na ehwu na nurse ni na ehwu anyi sa ade na mfiri techema na se a enu na etimi de sa ade ne ba.
Okay, so we heard those interesting comments there. I mean, people have all kinds of. We'll talk about the tongue tie later. We talked about why a child who is otherwise developing normally doesn't have hearing impairment. 2 years, but it's just saying a few words here and there. What are some of the reasons for that phenomenon?
Parents who speak to their children early initiate or they stimulate early speech in them. So you could, as a parent, you could start by reading very early to your child, reading rhymes, having picture books where you direct the child to look at the picture whilst you are demonstrating to the child. So that in itself is a form of stimulation. And if this is lacking in this modern day where parents are always busy and, I mean, they are never around to help the child, the children don't get that stimulation. So the child doesn't have anyone to practice with. So if you are reading constantly, you are interacting with the child very well, it helps stimulate the child so that the child can pick up the speech early.
Is it true that male children speak
Actually,
develop speech slower than females?
I was actually going to talk about that. And I'm glad you said your son, because it's also been studied and found out that boys speak relatively later than girls. And even their clarity of speech is also a bit delayed when you compare the two genders. But the interesting bit of it is that babies actually develop their hearing by 7 months in utero.
While they are in the womb?
Yes. And so that is actually when to start language stimulation. It's a time to be talking to your baby. And it's interesting how they also get to know the voices of their mother and then other people around who are actually always speaking to their hearing.
Interesting.
Yes, and so it's one of the things that we need to learn as Ghanaians, because whenever you even tell mothers to talk to their children, their babies who are just about 3 months, they find it very weird. Why should I even talk to them? This baby doesn't know anything, you know, but it starts from there. And then the stimulating environment is also created when you start asking questions. You know, when you ask questions, you put them in a situation where they have to give you an answer. And so you stir up that desire to actually speak. And one of the things that we didn't also mention is what child are we talking about in this situation? Is it a first child, a second child, or a third child? That's also very important, because if you are the first child, most likely you don't have other children around. And indeed, children prefer to hear the voices of other children. So where they are children, they love to hear their voices more than even adults. And then they pick up language from there. Awesome. So it's important to always create that stimulating environment to foster speech in children.
Is it also true that children who start school early pick up the language quicker? Is it a myth or is it a truth? Because that's one of the things I've heard over and over again, that, if your child is not speaking, not picking up the language quickly, take him or her to school. He or she will pick up.
Okay. I think it's also based on the stimulation, the stimulation that we are talking about. So when they go to school, they are interacting with other children, they hear other children speak, and then they are also kind of stimulated to also talk. And then another thing is, so people talk about the use of bilingual language. So if you are speaking Twi at home, the Ghanaian language, and then the child is also learning English in school, does it delay the speech? So studies have proved that, if you use too many languages, it takes a while before the child is able to grasp everything. So parents are actually encouraged not to use English language at home so that the child doesn't get confused. So you use one language at home, because you go to a home and then mother is a Ga, father is an Akan, and all the languages are just flying about and the child gets very confused about it. So if you stick to one language at home, the child goes to school and there's another language, the child is able to pick up quickly with their speech.
And actually, kids who are actually introduced to 2 languages very early have a relatively high IQ. So up to 2 languages is a good thing for the child. It's when you go beyond 2 languages,
then it's too much.
There's confusion. Because like I said, language is a set of symbols and words that have rules. So they have the task of learning each rule for every language. And that's a bit difficult for them when it's 3. But when it's 2, it's also very stimulating for the brain.
Okay. So speech delay and tongue tie, we heard the vox pop. A lot of people associated tongue tie with speech delay. Is it a truth or a myth? We'll go on a quick break. When we come back, we'll answer that question. Stick and stay.
Your presence has changed my life.
Your tenderness makes me want to take care of you forever.
And I promise that I will give you nothing but the best always. Cousins Baby with natural ingredients also gives the best care for baby's soft skin and hair. Cousins Baby, growing together naturally.
So welcome back. This is Fruits of the Womb, brought to you by kind courtesy of Cousins Baby and Camel Baby antiseptic. Let's stay interactive. Go to Facebook, type Fruits of the Womb, and you can post your questions, comments, or contributions. Today on Fruits of the Womb, we are discussing speech delay in children. And before we went on the break, we wanted to know if tongue tie does cause speech delay. Myth or truth?
Okay.
Dr. Bonnie.
So, tongue tie.
Can you briefly tell us what tongue tie is for the benefit of those who don't know?
For children, I mean, there's a muscle, a thin muscle just beneath the tongue. And as children grow, it's supposed to regress or it's supposed to disappear with time. But then for some children, it may persist. And the prominence of it or the severity or the degree of it is what might impair the speech. So if the frenulum persists and then is such that the child has very little movement of the tongue from side to side.
So the frenulum is that remnant of
yes, the remnant of the
under
tissue.
The tongue,
exactly.
Linked to the floor of the mouth.
Yeah. So you have very limited movement of the tongue from side to side. Okay. This can itself affect speech. Now, if the child is not able to stick out the tongue above the upper gum, it could also affect the speech. If you are not able to lift the tongue all the way up to the roof of the mouth, it could also affect the speech. Okay. So a tongue tie in itself depends on the degree of the tongue tie. And how to get rid of it is a very simple procedure. It's a surgical procedure. And, I mean, the surgeons will just make a slit and then the child will be free of it. And one other thing is, if you have a child, for parents, if you have a child that you realize that the child has difficulty in latching onto the breast, or the child has difficulty feeding, because this can also present with feeding difficulties. Okay. So if you have a child who is not able to latch on well to the breast and has feeding difficulties such that the child becomes malnourished, you need to seek your physician consult and then find out what exactly is going on with the child so that a thorough examination is done on the child.
So Dr. Gazy, Dr. Bonnie mentioned hearing problems as part of causes of speech delay. How can a parent tell that their child probably has a hearing problem? Because the child can't speak, can't tell you that I can't hear you. How can a parent tell that probably my child can't hear?
I think this question is a very important and relevant question in this discussion, because a lot of mothers actually miss it all the time. And they miss it because of lack of knowledge. They don't know exactly what to expect. But we know that by 6 months, okay, children undergo what we call hatching, like chicks hatching out of the eggshell. You know, from birth, they are a bit quiet and passive, and all they do most of the time is just feeding and sleeping. At 6 months, when they start sitting, they become more interested in the environment. They are very curious, and by 7 months, they actually, when they start crawling, they begin to respond to name call. And they also do something we call social referencing. That is, if the child is crawling away from the mother, they want to look back at you to know whether they are running into danger or they are safe. Okay, these are important forms of communication that mothers should look out for, because a child who doesn't have hearing may not respond to name call, for instance, and so we'll probably just keep on going and going and going. And you know, the other thing is when they're breastfeeding, they like to stop and look around.
Look at you, yeah.
Every little noise, they stop. They want to see the source of the noise. Yeah. It's interesting how those little cues can be picked up in a suspected case of hearing impairment.
And then just to add to it, such children are inattentive. Most of the time to their children who present with learning difficulties. So you have a child who is struggling in school. You need to find out what is happening with the child. Does the child, the child cannot even hear anything that is being said at school. And then for such children you be at home with them, and normally they want the TVs to be increased in volume. So they want very high volumes, and you realize that there is a problem with the child. And then when you're talking to them, it's like you have to shout on top of your voice before they can hear you.
You should suspect. So what can be done briefly for children who have real speech problems? Any interventions, or is it a hopeless case?
Well, coming back to the risk factors we mentioned, we talked about the fact that there could clearly be a problem with the ear. And usually, or typically in children, we know that ear infections, they get a lot of ear infections. And so a child who's having frequent ear infections is a child that we have to look out for and ensure that it doesn't deteriorate into a situation where the hearing is actually impaired. That's one aspect of it. Then we also talked about the fact that it could be a social communicative disorder, like autism. And in this situation, for instance, you need a speech therapist. And of course, it's a multidisciplinary issue. But typically, the speech therapist will be in the middle with the occupational therapist to engage the child and then help the social aspect of it and the communicative bit of it. One of the things we didn't talk about actually is mothers who have emotional disorders. For instance, a mother who has depression, the baby, even a baby or a child can become depressed as well. And so if that is what it is, then we need to make sure that the mother is okay psychologically and we have given her the support that she needs. But you know, most of the time in our environment, we pay attention to the children alone. We don't look beyond the children to see other things that may be happening. Some children may also have cognitive impairment, some kind of mental impairment, and that could also be the reason why the speech is delayed. So it really depends on what is actually causing the impairment, and then we need to do what we need to do about it.
So another form of therapy is the physical therapy, where sometimes mothers are encouraged to prepare food in a certain texture to help exercise the muscles and then the structures that are responsible for the production of sound, like the tongue that I mentioned earlier on.
Okay.
So that's the other thing. And we should note that for children who have speech delay, their social function is impaired. So such children are said to have poor interaction skills, poor communication skills. They are not able to interact well with their peers. So we have to note that now.
As well.
Actually, most of them have temper tantrums because it's very frustrating.
Not being able to communicate what you are feeling.
Not perceiving what you're saying.
So viewers, like you know, every week there's a question of the week. So for this week, the question is,
all children should be able to form a sentence by 2 years. A, true. B, false.
Send your answer to the number on the screen. Let's check out last week's winner.
Overnutrition is a form of malnutrition. The answer is B.
Congratulations. So we are wrapping up, but you talked about speech therapists. How available are speech therapists in Ghana? Are they nationwide? Is it something that is only available to the rich? And then your final words.
So speech therapy is available for children with speech delay, but then unfortunately we don't have so many speech therapists in Ghana. There are very few of them in Korle Bu and then other parts of the country. I know of just about 6 in the whole of Ghana. I don't know if there are any additional ones, but then there are very few. And unfortunately, in assessing their therapy, it's a bit expensive. So parents are actually encouraged to do certain things that will help in the therapy of the child. So you're not supposed to interrupt the child when the child is talking. You need to just allow the child to complete the sentences that they make. And then you don't shut down the child, because this will just end up making the child just, called up in her own shell and then decide not to even talk at all. So in employing the use of speech therapists, the parents also have a role to play.
Yeah.
So your final words, Dr. Gazy.
Well, I think it's worth mentioning that at the moment, in the University of Ghana is also training speech therapists.
Oh, that's good to know.
Yes, and so that's a good headway that we've made as a nation. And then my final words are these, that language and cognition, or language and intelligence, are really related, because as soon as a child picks up language, they are able to start asking questions, expressing themselves, responding to stimuli. And as they do so, they tend to exercise their brains. The first 3 years of life are very critical in the life of a child, because the brain is undergoing a lot of changes, positive ones. And so it's important that parents really keep an eye on speech development or the speech acquisition, because we care so much about our children going to school and becoming very clever, being able to solve problems, having a retentive memory. But we have to understand that it all comes first with acquiring your speech at the right time when you should. So early detection is key.
So thank you so much, Dr. A.C. Gazy Tete and Dr. Nanaya Echa Bonny. It's been great having you on Fruits of the Womb. Viewers, I hope you've learned so much from today's episode. Remember that speech delay may be caused by a problem in the brain or the organs responsible for making sounds, that's the mouth and the muscles within the mouth, or hearing impairments. Report to the nearest health facility and request to be referred to a pediatrician if you suspect that your child has a problem with hearing or speech impairments. So viewers, this is Fruits of the Womb. I hope you enjoyed yourselves. You've learned a lot. My name is Dr. Vera Bayu. I hope to see you same time next week. Remember, God loves you. Stay blessed.